In the 1960s, very early 1960s, I trained with the government microwave warfare establishment. I looked at all aspects of microwave warfare, and when I finished my time in the military, because I had a lot of expertise in the microwave field, I was asked if I would carry on with this research. They found that there was an unusual number of breast cancers, childhood leukemias, other cancers, and they couldn't work out why. So they changed some of the staff, and then they went down with leukemias and cancers. And again, they changed the staff, and then they looked into this and found they were being microwaved. And this is where the United States became a little bit naughty. They decided to keep this quiet. The Americans used their own people as initial guinea pigs to develop their own weapons. And then when it was discovered what was going on, initially there was a denial that you always get. Then there was a cover-up report, and finally a very renowned professor, I think he has about 18 professorships, John Goldsmith, he wrote the definitive proper report and found that low-level microwaves were causing an enormous amount of cancers and leukemias and ill effects. And by then, everybody was leaping onto the microwaves as stealth weapons, and they go from there, which was the 50s, right up to and including the present day. The ladies were protesting about having American missiles on English soil. Mm-hmm. And it was a peaceful protest. All they were doing were camping outside the perimeter of the American base. There was no violence, no swearing, no shouting. It was a peaceful protest. And it was found that from the American base, the ladies were being microwaved. And it was actually measured. They were being microwaved to make them sick. And in fact, when the figures came out, there was a disproportionate amount of tumours, personality changes, suicidal tendencies of the ladies. They were deliberately microwaved by the Americans for protesting about their base. With one pulse frequency, you can just make people so suicidal, they can't be bothered to act like a demonstrator anymore. All they want to do is sleep or lay in bed all day. So if you're targeting demonstrators, you make them suicidally depressed, and they don't care about demonstrating anymore because they're too upset. Whereas if you want to cause a specific psychiatric illness, you would have an infrared device that followed the person, and you would link it to a pencil-thin microwave source, so the microwave beam would always target a specific gland or a specific part of the brain or an eye or a heart. So you would have them being targeted.
If
They can cause insanity. And it was an experiment. One of the experiments was to take an ordinary sane person, cause insanity, and have a psychiatrist who was unknown to everybody diagnose schizophrenia or paranoia or a psychiatric illness.
Right.
That was a successful outcome. And the person would spend the rest of their life in an asylum in misery, but to the government scientists, that was a success.
Well, it's a guinea pig locked up.
Oh yeah. I mean, humans. The difference between humans are like guinea pigs. If they want to experiment on you, by the thousands they will, and you can be driven to insanity and death, and you just become a tick in a box, without any so much as a feeling. Yeah, and this is what they do, and this is why they are above the law. It wasn't until around the 70s that this became secret. For some reason, it was talked about openly. You know, if I'm talking to a spy and I want to find out where the spy was trained, how the spy was recruited, over the 5-year period of training and everything that went on, it's going to take years and years and years. But if you want to talk about microwaves and chips and microwave weapons, they'll just talk about it over a biscuit and a cup of tea. It wasn't secret. Most governments talked openly, or people talked openly about it. It wasn't until the 70s, mid-70s, that I think the full potential of this globally came into force. And the governments decided then to put everything under the Official Secrets Acts. But until then, nothing was secret. It was just talked about openly. Whereby, with the special forces, you could send down, if you had an idea roughly what country they were in, you could send down a beam from a satellite. The chip would be switched on by the beam, energized, and would send a signal back. You've got that type of chip. The other type is when it is pulsing continuously to stimulate, let's say, a gland in the body at a set frequency to produce a specific chemical that will produce a specific biochemical response in the brain. So you can have one working permanently, and you can have them working intermittently, and you can have them that will only work if they are stimulated. I mean, voices are the easiest ones, because all you have to do is stimulate the cochlea with a set resonant frequency. It's very easy. Voices are very easy. And it isn't people imagining voices, they physically hear them. They physically hear, as I'm talking to you, my voice isn't inside your brain. My voice goes no further than an inch into your ear, no further at all. It's the electrical signal that makes you interpret how I sound. And once you've got this electrical signal, which can be a chip or lots of things, you can physically make people hear voices, certain voices, and it can be any conversation, and it can be anybody you want to hear. It can be a soft, angelic voice. It can be a god. It can be something that scares you, like a devil. It can be anything. Fair enough. So I was there. I went into the back of a big black car and it took me off in the dark and then underneath a huge building in the dark. And I was suddenly thinking, well, hang on, this could be a bullet in the back of the head time. I'm getting uncomfortable here. But he took me out and took me to a room and he said, I'm an international scientist, he said, and something is really, really worrying me. And I have to tell somebody who can tell the world. Now, I actually knew what he told me, I knew was going on anyway, because it had been discussed in other countries. But he said, it is now possible to genetically change bacteriums and virus, genetically change them. What has been developed now is if bacterium, they can lay, and yeasts, they can lay in the soil for hundreds of years in a dormant stage. And it's known by grave diggers or people who dig up old graves that it's possible when light comes on the bacterium to regenerate the bubonic plague that's been laying in the ground for several hundred years. It only wants that particular frequency and bang, it's active again. You don't need more than 2 brain cells to work out where you go from here. Viruses are neither dead nor alive. They inhabit hosts. If I put a virus inside a dormant bacteria that I know I can spring to life, I go to Norway on a holiday, or Denmark, or Sweden, I just spread the virus around the forests with the dormant bacteria, and I come back. And I can wait, if I like, 100 years, 200 years, or 2 hours. Makes no difference to me. And then all I have to do with HARP or a similar device is put the frequency, the microwave frequency off the ionosphere, down onto Norway. Whenever I feel like it, the virus will spring to life because their host has sprung to life. This is where we are. So countries can now, just by introducing bacteriums and viruses and whatever, they can totally devastate the economic possibilities of another country. All of the microwave transmitters are going up everywhere because somebody, if they wanted to, could use them for other effects. The system is up and running. In a 3-month period, I had 5 lady police officers in this house, all with cancer. I've had a series of calls from officers saying that their personalities have been changed. Whenever I go to a country, and I think the year before, I did 6 countries, I think last year or the year before. The questions always come around to Tetra, and they always come around to aggressive behaviour from the police since they started using Tetra. And I have the government documents that say this can cause neurological damage, this can cause cancer, this can cause aggressive behaviour and personality changes. This was at the beginning of the experiment, and the experiment with Tetra is not due to finish until 2018. So it's an experimental system. The United States one was quite interesting. It was to do with special forces, probably 5 or 6 years ago. they came back from a mission, and of the 6 or 8 gentlemen that were in the special forces, 5 of them, I believe, went home. I think it was 5 or 6 went home and severely beat their wives or children or both, where some of the wives died, some ended up in hospital, but they were severely beaten. And it was believed that the communications apparatus they were using was in training the brain and stimulating violence. And this was Fort Bragg. Now, I either had a phone call from Fort Bragg or I had a phone call from the embassy to ask if I knew what frequencies could cause this. Because I ended up talking to each. And I said, don't tell me, I will tell you what frequencies they have been using. Now, the Special Forces don't just hold them up, they're on permanently. So we're talking massive entrainment, far beyond what the ordinary person would suffer. But it induced such a level of entrainment and violence. So I told them what frequencies I believed they would be using. I sent them documentary evidence, and the whole thing was hushed over, and it was on the news, but then they obviously, I would imagine, changed the frequency.
You what, mate?